Hey, Jack.
Hey, Trevor, how are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome back to another episode of Hey, Jack, Leadership Reflections with Jack Nehlig. And Jack, today I'm personally very excited for this conversation. We have our second guest of the show here today, somebody that you and I both know personally from our days working at Phoenix Contact. I'm sure you're going to get into a great background here and introduction, more so than I can. But first off, I really appreciate you being here today with us, Don. And so with that said, Jack, you did amazing with the intro for our last guest. Would you mind taking over here and giving the listeners an intro for our guest today?
Well, I'd be happy to. So today we're going to have someone that you and I both know from our previous careers. He's a consummate sales professional, has held many roles in selling. And of course, in selling, one of the keys to doing it great is great communications, right? So we thought that he would be, you and I thought, once I thought of him, would be an awesome guest for our Hey Jack podcast because of one of the pillars that we went over. I think it was episode number 7, was the pillar of communication. And we did a good job of it, but it's definitely one that needs a little bit more depth in, I think. So welcome, Don, to the Hey Jack podcast.
Well, thank you, Jack. And hello, Trevor. It's been a while since I've seen you as well, too. It is my pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate the invite.
Well, super, Don. Well, why don't you do a better job of introducing yourself? Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your career and your interests and what makes you tick?
All right. Well, as you both know, I wrapped up a 41-year career back in the summer in industrial automation and controls in a variety of different roles there, different market segments as well, too. I heard a quote recently. It said, "A career is a job that's gone on too long." And so I can say that I had an excellent career because I wrapped up probably the last half of that career almost with Phoenix Contact. And I can just tell you that was the best professional experience I could ever hope to have. And I'm grateful for that. Now, I said that was my career. Actually, I had another quasi-career before that. Going way back to my senior year in high school, I started working at a local radio station. And over the years after that, I worked at various radio stations in Eastern North Carolina. In the process, got married. My wife went to school. And when she got wrapped up, I went back to school, NC State University, got my degree in electrical engineering. My wife said I really needed a real job. And so I did that and embarked upon that. As far as interest goes, of course, I'm an all things music enthusiast. I wouldn't say I'm a musician, but I make a lot of noise on everything from guitars and drums and other things as well, too. And I am now kind of reliving a little bit of my previous life. I have an online internet radio station called the Frisco Roadhouse. So if you're interested in checking that out, go to www.friscoroadhouse.com.
Awesome.
So, yes.
So what a career. And Don and I worked together for almost 25 years of his career. And he did leave out, he worked for Allen Bradley and Schneider and a rep firm, and then also Phoenix Contact. So he has great depth of experience in different kinds of companies too. So I always think those careers really galvanize you as a leader and an individual because you see different perspectives on the art of what we're doing. So that's fantastic. Go ahead, Don.
No, I was just saying, yes, I had the pleasure of working with some really great people, great companies, and I consider myself quite fortunate to have had a very great professional career because of the people I worked with and for.
You bet. You bet. So, Don, let's now maybe jump into communication. And I think I'll set it up by reminding everybody a little bit about episode 7 that we did. And what we said was back then that communication is one of those, a little bit of those Rodney Dangerfield things, right? So no, but it's really important, but it doesn't get enough respect, right? It just doesn't, people just kind of forget about it and think about it when they're not really trying. So what we said was communication is one of those things where nothing has really changed. All the fundamentals of communication are still very important and all real. but it's also an area where everything is changing. So it's kind of that confusing art right now. And it's moving around a lot. The other thing we pointed out was when you do great place to work surveys or employees engagement surveys, employees almost always rank better communications from their leaders as the number one thing they want.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have a more important topic than communication, but you have one that everybody says, oh, don't worry, I'll get better at my communications. And then they don't, right? So it's this really strange dichotomy. It's so important, but people don't give it enough time to get better at it. So that's why we're excited to have you here today. And you and I, in our pre-chat a little bit for this podcast, we talked about how you've thought through this a lot and you've studied the science of communications a little bit. And you're fond of a concept called supercommunicators. So
Yes.
when you said that to me, I said, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is going to be a great chat. So why don't we just hand it back to you right now? And why don't you fill us in on what the heck a supercommunicator is?
I'll do my best. I'll back up first to your headline. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed.
Yeah.
Certainly in the world of technology and how we communicate, that has definitely changed. But what hasn't changed is the importance of communication and how we do it in all of its different forms. But I'm reminded of the quote by George Bernard Shaw, who said, the greatest single problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. We do a lot of communicating. Think about it. We can communicate with almost anyone, anywhere in the world in an instant. But are we doing any better job of communicating with someone? I would say absolutely not. In fact, I think we're doing worse and worse because of the brevity of our conversations, the many times one way type of thing. So I did pick up this book by Charles Duhigg. I picked up earlier this year. It's from 2024, so it's still recent. But of course, it has this timeless information. He talks about super communicators. So the idea is this. In fact, let me give you the scenario. We've all experienced this. Have you ever gotten into a conversation with someone, and when it's done, you're feeling very confused about perhaps what you even talked about, or you walk away with this very uneasy feeling that somehow something's just wasn't right or fulfilling or informative about that conversations? Well, that's miscommunication, and it occurs most of the time. It all comes down to connection. We human beings have evolved to desire connection, and connection is, well, we have some terms for that, right? When someone says, we're on the same page, for instance, what's really happening physiologically is something called neural entrainment. And that's where, to some degree, our brains are actually aligning. And when we do that, all of a sudden, something very different happens. And you know this one as well, too. You've talked to someone, and they're just so easy to talk to, and the conversation just flows endlessly. You lose track of time almost, and it's so enjoyable, whatever it may be about. And you walk away just feeling better about yourself, or feeling like you have some clarity about some particular topic. If that's the case, most likely the person you talked to was a super communicator. And what a super communicator is able to do is to listen carefully, ask some questions that helps to understand where you're going with the conversation, what mood that is in, and then match that mood and speak in a way that makes it easy for people to listen or want to listen to us. So that's the general concept there, and that's the idea behind super communicators. And that's why this idea of connection is so important. That's what we're forming. That's when true communication happens. By the way, I'm going to focus on conversation. There's lots of ways to communicate, but conversation is the one that is the most meaningful because that's generally one-on-one. That's when real things happen. That's when the connection can take place. And if we can't get that part right, then we will never get the other less effective means of communication to work for us as well as we should. And of course, this is especially true for leaders. It's important in every relationship there, but that's why communication and making this connection is so important.
Yeah.
So we start with this very simple concept of saying, when we start a conversation with someone, there's some quiet negotiation that's going on. This could be subconscious. This could be some type of just your assessment. But the first thing is, well, what are we talking about? And more importantly, how are we going to talk about it? And this is occurring in every conversation, maybe not general quick chats type of thing, but when we get into a real conversation with someone, that's what's going to happen here. And what a supercommunicator is able to do is start understanding the type of conversation that we are in. So what Charles Duhigg outlines in his book are these 3 different conversations. And I'll go and give you the question that needs to be answered to each one of those conversations. The first one is, what is this really about? The second one is, how do we feel? And number 3 is, who are we? So the idea is that each of these different types of conversations have a different mindset associated with them, different goals, different outcomes if they are successful. And what a supercommunicator is able to do is to, through various means, determine what type of conversation that the other person is in, match that mood, and that's when that connection starts taking place. So let's just start with the first one. What's this all about? That tends to be a very practical kind of decision-making conversation. It is, hey, we've got to decide on something. Maybe even if it's talking about analyzing a business plan, for instance, that is the first conversation we get into. It tends to be very straightforward. Unfortunately, the second part, how do we feel, deals with the emotional content of that. And we human beings are emotional beasts, In fact, emotions, shape just about every conversation that we have. And I'll give you a perfect example I'm talking about. If my wife and I, she tells me we have plans for dinner with some friends, for instance, what does the guy always do? Okay, what day, what time, where we're going to be. That's all we need to know, right? But my wife is asking additional questions. Well, who else is going to be there? And is there an occasion? Is there something I need to know? And there's a lot of emotional things that come into that, which, by the way, moves us into the third type of conversation. Who are we? These deal with our social identities. And boy, in the world we live in today, the social identities about who we are, let's say you get into a conversation about politics or religion, if you don't recognize how these different influences of emotion and social identities come into play, then it makes it very, very hard to connect with someone. So Charles Duhigg goes through a variety of things to be thinking about in each of these conversations, but it becomes really important to understand which one we're in. Again, a supercommunicator is someone who can understand that you're moving from one to the next, for instance. I'll give you one about, let's say, something like emotion. And this is a lesson I've learned after now 50 years of marriage. I learned this lesson the hard way. My wife presents me with a problem she's having. And what do men all do? That's a call to action to solve the problem, right? I've learned that's not really what my wife wants most of the time. Most of the time it is, hey, can you show some empathy here? Can you just hear me out? Let me express my emotional stuff. And boy, I think I learned that lesson a little too late, but I have come to understand how important that really is. And as I said, in the world we're living in today now, I think our communication is working against us. Social media, for instance, the ability to have these one direction type of communication information. And unfortunately, as we all know, the type of conversations that we have in face-to-face or virtually, there really just becomes a more of a battle to win versus getting to a true understanding of someone else. And I like this kind of way it was phrased in the book about talking about the importance of this in a conversation is to learn how people around us see the world and help them understand how we see the world. And I think if we can get to that point, if we can make those connections in our conversations, then we really do have a chance to maybe have some, what they call a learning conversation. And that learning conversation is just that, where we understand better what someone else, how they see the world, and then hopefully present our views in ways that people are open to hearing. So there's a lot going on there, but that's our goal. Get into a true learning conversation. I think if we could learn to do that, which, by the way, we all can learn. There's a lot of great tips in the books about how you can deal with each one. I encourage someone to check that out if you're interested in there. But I think just the awareness of different conversations, awareness that I need to start thinking about how do I connect with somebody else. If we can do that, we can get way ahead of the game in terms of something that's meaningful.
So, during that, Don, two things came to mind. When we were 45 years ago starting our careers in selling, it all became about benefits. And the idea of benefits is it's what does it mean to the other person as opposed to what does your product do. So when you were talking, I was thinking about that early training that we had in selling to say, wait a minute, the most important thing is understanding the customer's needs and what benefits, what they're getting out of this if they were to use your thing. And that kind of suggested the framework you were talking about. And the other one I vividly remember is how you get there. And it was all about open and closed probes.
Yes.
Questions, open and closed questions. And it was always the importance of the open questions, not the closed questions, except for the closed questions were at the end to confirm a lot of things. But the open questioning of a person and their ideals and their needs and what's making them tick and how you can help them is I think, if I'm playing this back to you right, a great example of the way the super communicator would behave.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the very nice practical tips there is how to prepare for a conversation. Now, certainly we don't do this for everything, but I've learned, especially in my world of virtual meetings and stuff, not the same as having a face-to-face conversation where all of a sudden I have to carry on the conversation. So this was a great tip, talking about questions. So if you're preparing for a conversation with someone, let's say you're going to be going out to dinner with some friends, these are some really great tips. So the first one is we want to ask some deeper questions versus shallow questions. And here's an example. You're meeting someone for the first time and you say, well, where do you work? That's a shallow question. Whereas a question such as, what was your favorite job? There's a big difference in how that question is processed by someone. Mm-hmm. It gets them thinking. And by the way, they start opening up and discussing things in much more detail. And by the way, I'm going to jump back to that in just that point in just a moment here. So first, when you're getting ready to go out, have a social setting, see somebody, go ahead and think of a couple of questions, deep questions that you'd like to ask somebody. They could be very specific. They could be very general. If I know I'm going to see a buddy who likes sports, I might bring up a conversation about, hey, what do you think about NIL and the portal, for instance? Just having something prepared like that to spark a conversation, especially if you had kind of a stopping point. The second item on that list is think of at least one thing that you'd like to say. what is the one thing that someone might want to take away that you had mentioned in a conversation? And then the last one there is to be, oh my goodness, I forgot what the last one was. Um,
That's all right.
Or I'll add it as make a special point to really think about what this other person might want to hear or need.
Right.
I think there's a comment in there saying, a question that was probably used many years ago. It says, do you need a hug today, kind of thing? Is there something that can elicit an emotional response? So back to my initial point, I said I want to come back to this. One of the key things about conversation, and by the way, this came up in your previous episode on communication, talking about things like authenticity and transparency, that type of thing. There's this thing about when we open ourselves up, and that's why when someone asks a question and we open ourselves and we express a vulnerability, that is very powerful emotionally to get someone to be more trusting, more comfortable around you. Unfortunately, we live in a world today where we don't want to show a vulnerability. In fact, some people will weaponize a weakness, against us, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we have so much miscommunication. What a supercommunicator is able to do is that when, whether they're being asked or whether they understand how to bring that out in a conversation, that they can show vulnerability. Because if you can do that, you can build trust, you can feel credibility, authenticity there. And that's an important part, as we see later on, we talk about leadership too. I think there's so many leaders out there who are much too guarded in their persona that they present. And Jack, I'll compliment you on this one here. That was one of the things that your accessibility, I always felt like I could walk up to you and ask almost anything. And again, it's that simple trust and credibility that's very important for a leader.
Well, thank you, Don. But yes, you could always do it, and you still can always talk to me and ask me a question. Or is she going on?
I'm going to ask you for a raise now.
I know you can't ask me for a raise, but you can ask me about what your dinner plans are and what you should wear, because that's one of the more emotional things that your wife would want to know. So we got to make sure we cover all the bases. So let me jump back to another thing we talked about in the first episode that also I think directly relates to what you said and all this. It's the middle part. How do you feel, right?
Yes.
And I think to get there, it's that concept of active listening where you constantly keep coming back to the topics and looking at it from different perspectives so that you fully understand someone's point. Because in the beginning, you said it's the problem is we think we have the illusion that we're communicating, because people will nod their head and go, I'm listening. And really, they're just saying, I'm listening.
Yeah.
They're not hearing, but they're saying, yep, I'm listening to what you're saying. So this active listening where you question while you listen and confirm while you listen keeps chipping away at the illusion and making it real, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. That's the looping process. And
the looping process.
Yes.
I knew you had a better name for it.
No, that's a highly technical term, of course.
I love it. Sounds like a coder.
Well, it's just and it is so simple. That's just about becoming a better communicator. Yes, it's hard to do all this stuff, but with a little bit of effort and practice, boy, you get so much better. But it is active listening, asking questions, repeating what someone said, but it's also keep going until it's clear that you both clearly understand what's being said.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, here's the other important part of any conversation. It's the nonverbal communication, which is something that we've truly lost in the virtual world and of Teams and emails and texts and stuff. And that's why a face-to-face conversation is so important. And that's why making a connection is so much more likely to happen. That ability to all those nonverbal signals that you're getting. I forget who said, I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson said, and I'm slightly paraphrasing. It says, "Who you are speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying." We do not recognize how powerful just images are, and and how we process that emotionally in our conversation. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about there. Of course, there's plenty of examples I could give you around the world of politics right now, but let me pick one that's a little bit more mundane. So let's just say um, I live in the Triangle area, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and so we have some great rivalries between NC State, UNC, and Duke. If I'm talking to someone that's got this big bold UNC logo on their shirt or something, I'm already kind of a little bit at odds with them. Whereas if someone else is wearing their Wolfpack hat, and you'll flash at the Wolf, yeah, go Pack kind of stuff. Just that simple nonverbal thing makes you connect, which leads me back into that third point about conversations or social identities. So what are the key tips that comes up in the book is talking about this? If you are having a conversation and the identities that are at play is, let's say, Democrat versus Republican, you've already built a barrier there. But one of the ways to help overcome that barrier is to realize we have many different identities. We're not just a political party. We're not just a particular, alumni, for instance. We have roles and identities as, let's say, a parent, or as a sibling, or as a friend, or as a member of a civic organization or of a church. And one of the keys there of dealing with someone who has a social identity that is really at conflict is to realize there are many other identities and where we can connect and have some meaningful dialogue, even if there's one that's still preventing us from getting all the way there. A very great tip there is to identify or create new identities. So, for instance, I might create an identity with someone that says, I've been on Hey Jack now, and I can immediately relate to someone else who has been on Hey Jack,
or listen to it, or
listen to it. There you go.
Fantastic. Back to the looping, two questions came to mind that I used throughout my career that I learned early on in my career. And when someone finishes a point, I often used to say, and I'd be in meetings with 6 or 8 people and I'd be quiet as a mouse and nobody wants to say anything. I would just say, hang on there. Let me make sure I understand the point, what you're trying to tell me. And then I would play it back. So it's the let me try to understand your point. And then another one is just saying, hey, I'm a little lost. Help me understand what you're getting at. Let's do this again. And just these little open questions that they get the person to restate their thing is I found to be so disarming too. It helps the room soften up and everybody else loosen up about whatever the communication is, and it really helps the presenter or the speaker to reinforce their point or realize they might have missed something in what they were trying to communicate. So having those questions, it was back to the being prepared for a conversation. I was always prepared to just say to everybody, hey, hold on, I'm not getting it. Let's re-loop this. Let's look at it again so I can understand your point. I'm not sure I got it.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing those often just help build bridges in conversations. I know they did.
Well, you brought up one of several key skills of communication for a leader. So I'd like to kind of jump off into
sure.
It's related topic, but I think it's very relevant, of course, specifically communication that's needed for leaders. There is no question that effective communication skills are essential if you're going to be a good leader. I mean, think about what you have to be able to do. You have to be able to unite your organization around some common goals and or a common objective there, for instance. You've got to inspire, you've got to motivate, and you have to help drive organizational success. So not in this book, but in some other things that I've read, just talked about some of the many things there and about why they pop. I want to mention some of those. And of course, one is that you brought there. So one of the key ones here, of course, is what we talk about, clarity and understanding. Obviously, as a leader, you have to be able to articulate your vision so that everyone understands where they're going, what they're trying to accomplish from that. And then as a follow to that, you have to be able to set expectations. People have to know what it is that they're doing. How would I even know that we have fulfilled your vision if we don't know what it is that we're supposed to be doing? And as you start doing that is the first step in this whole process of communication. Now, once you get to that point, now you got to get into perhaps one that came up I saw is called adaptability. As a communicator, think about this in the workforce right now. How many generations are at play? And boy, I have really come to recognize differences generationally in what they value, how they communicate. And as a leader, this is a big challenge, having to be able to adapt a communication style as needed to some very diverse needs and situations from that. And here's the other one where adaptability comes into play for communication. Imagine how you navigate change or challenges in the workforce. And I'll go back to COVID. Think about the crazy disruption that occurred, around March of 2020. And organizational, that was as tumultuous of an upheaval in Phoenix Contact and every company that you couldn't even imagine that, right? If you were going to business school, how do you prepare for that?
Never thought I'd see that.
How you have to adapt to that situation to lead. Again, the vision, organizational goals all have to be kind of revamped there to address this very new and very, very challenging situation, which I would suggest that we are only now 5 years out of this, only getting back to what I think is kind of a comfortable situation again, which is still undergoing a lot of changes there. Obviously, effective communications is important for building relationships within your organization. Think about how you build trust and confidence and credibility. We mentioned things like authenticity and transparency, because if you can build those kinds of strong relationships built on trust, that just opens things up that you can discover so many more. And back to your active listening and looping process there. One of the great things about that as a leader, if you are able to truly actively listen, again, to a very diverse range of input, what you get is, of course, more engagement. People are more willing to share that information with you. But think about what you're getting in return as a leader. You're getting new insights into different perspectives. These are the kinds of things that can really build the character of the team in terms of, how do we innovate? How do we get better at doing this? How do we get more motivated? Those are the kinds of things that people respond to. Again, Jack, I'm going to compliment you, not just because it's your show, but to me, you were the example of that. And I've told you the story before. I was in the process of coming to work for Phoenix Contact, and I was at one of the big kickoff meetings, and you were just being introduced. This would have been early in 2002. I kind of already had an offer to come, but I was there as a representative, not officially for Phoenix Contact. And I was apprehensive, Jack. All I heard was they're bringing some guy in from a big company, and I thought, oh God, I've had it with big corporations. But as soon as you spoke, you did that very thing, and I joined Phoenix Contact literally just weeks later from that, and enjoyed that career up until this past summer. So I know you have great communication skills, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you by elaborating on that too.
No, I'm retired now like you are. I'll take all the compliments I can get. I'm missing suck-ups.
Oh, well, there you go. All right. Well, so I'll wrap up this little segment by saying there's no question that effective communication skills are absolutely critical as a leader. But just as we talked about with super communicators, This is not something you're born with or have to be born with. These are things that you can learn to do. And there's some great resources out there. The Supercommunicator book is a great one, but there's other ones too, especially when you start getting into some heavy conversations. There's a book called Crucial Conversations. It's been out for many years. That was very good. And
Yes.
I'm going to use one example here to kind of tie all these things together. Think of this type of conversation that my wife is going through right now and has been before. She's helping an elderly lady at church who they are, and she and her husband are at that point where they are going to have to make some big decisions about what's this next phase of life looks like. They're giving up their home. They're giving up their independence to go live in an assisted care facility. I can only imagine how emotionally charged that is. And I've seen, and I probably made the mistake myself with my parents as they reached that point where I was in that, what's this really all about? I got to make some decisions here. Well, here's how we're going to handle the finances. Here's how we're going to manage this process. But you can imagine the emotional content, the sense of social identities that influence those conversations were far more important and far more impactful than making a decision about which retirement home someone's going to.
Yeah.
And I highly encourage people to think about that type of scenario where they're trying their best to support someone, but that's why it's so important to really ask the questions, understand the mood, try to match where this person is at. Because if you can do that, that conversation will flow much better and ultimately get to the decision-making part of that, but with hopefully in a way that addresses the emotional concerns and the social identity concerns that we all have.
That's fantastic, Don. Well, Don, what a great overview of the science of communication. I think you gave us one of the key building blocks, or the importance of one of the key building blocks, which is conversations, quality, super conversations, which is a foundation to great communication. So that was awesome. And I learned from you those three, questions that have to be asked, which is, what is it really about? How do we feel? And who are we? So I'm going to keep reminding myself of those three questions every time I approach a conversation. And so what a wonderful bit of learning today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Maybe you give us a little 1-minute commercial at the end on something else I think you're really great at, and that is public speaking, because I believe you're an accomplished Toastmaster. So why don't you give us a little overview of that quickly and what you'd recommend people do?
Well, thank you. Yes, I've been a member of Toastmasters since 2008. I've achieved Distinguished Toastmaster status, which is the highest level of recognition of Toastmasters. I love Toastmasters. It is a supportive and nurturing environment to help people become better public speakers. And believe me, no matter how good you might think you are, they have a great program that is over 100 years old, by the way, Jack. Goes back to the early 20s. The reason it's so good is because it can address so many different needs. No matter how skilled you are, it can help you get better. The club experience is where really, you kind of experience that, typically a weekly club meeting that is organized and structured in a way that it helps develop a variety of skills, including things like critical listening, for instance, but also public speaking and leadership qualities as well, too. The reason it's so important is that we all know public speaking is something that many people just dread. And there are many people who join Toastmasters who are scared to death, and all they're trying to do, they're not trying to become public speakers. They're just trying to be able to learn how to get past the anxiety of speaking in front of people. Yeah. And believe me, I've heard so many testimonies about how Toastmasters has done that very thing. Living in the Triangle area where I live, Research Triangle Park is right in the middle of the Triangle. We have a lot of tech workers who English is a second language. Toastmasters is a great way for them to help do that as well, too. And like I said, I can't think of a better organization, a better way of saying if I want to become better at public speaking and leadership, I highly recommend that you check out a Toastmasters close to you.
Fantastic. Well, you can be a resource for them if they have questions.
Gladly.
Well, hey, Trevor, I think we wrapped it up, man.
Yeah, I just want to say, Don, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I was, number one, hypnotized by that radio voice of yours. So it was better listening to you than listening to myself talk.
Everyone says I have a face for radio. Yes, thank you very much.
And then in addition to that, just tons of great content information here. I was taking a lot of notes down. So we'd love to have you back in the future, as I'm sure our listeners would as well. But again, I appreciate you, Don, and I've always respected you as a great communicator. So you were a super communicator long before this concept in the book came along, in my opinion. So
my wife says I could be better at listening. At least I think that. Actually, I've never heard her say that.
I think
perfect, and that's the best way to end it right there. There you go. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Yep, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Take care, everybody. Go lead.
Ciao for now.